So first off, I wanted to say thank you to Isaac and Mary for allowing me to have the opportunity to share something I'm extremely passionate about, and that I live as a lifestyle and I believe has changed my life in such profound ways beyond just my health. And that's what I want to start with, is my favorite takeaway from this keto lifestyle and brain health, and that's this awareness or consciousness piece, that from the basics of what we're going to go through to understand what foods are actually food versus food-like products and what they do in our body and how they help us perform optimally versus take energy from us. There's a level of understanding of all these things that goes into this. And then that's what was the first piece of me optimizing my life from being diagnosed with a brain tumor at 21 years old, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that led into blowing out my knee a couple years later. That led me into this exercise piece and then the importance. And then the final piece was mindset, which along the whole way, I wasn't conscious, but I was developing a strong mindset. So my favorite piece of this is just the consciousness and awareness to all other areas of our life, because once you figure out how to optimize your choices and what we consume to better our lives, then you start to think, how else can I do this? How else can I create a better business? How else can I be a better version of myself to my family and my friends, things like that. So that's my favorite piece. And that being said, for those that don't know who I am, my name is Josh Perry. I'm a former professional BMX athlete and multiple brain tumor survivor, now keto coach and public speaker. I share my story around the world. I share about keto, my perspectives, my learning lessons along the way, and it's my goal that I'll be able to shift people's perspectives that leads to new change to become empowered to live as healthy, happy, and successful as they possibly can. I had to react to a situation at the young age of 21 that almost took my life, and my goal is to get people to see the world that they live and the events that happen for them differently, so that way they can show up the best way possible, not have to react to a situation as I've had to now, switching into being proactive. So on the document I shared, or that Mary shared, I created a little outline for today's flow, and it starts out with a few terms, and I don't want to spend too much time on them, but it's some language I'm going to be using, and I want people to be familiar with this language, and a lot of it's from high school biology, so you'll probably have heard these terms. And starting out is the mitochondria. And basically, they're parts within the cell that take oxygen and food energy, that are calories, and create our body's natural energy currency known as ATP. And ATP is, like I said, it's our body's natural energy currency. Food energy is called calories. A lot of people are fixated on calories, a lot of mainstream thinking, and until I got educated on this on a deeper level, it's not about the calories, because calories can create some level of energy or more optimal levels. So the goal should be quality ATP, and so we'll be talking more about this along the way. Next term is glucose. People have probably heard of this. Simply put, it's blood sugar levels. Glucose is also found in food, carbohydrates, but once we eat them, it turns into sugar in the blood. Insulin is a hormone that takes, its primary objective is to get energy into the cell. So it takes the energy from the bloodstream, puts it into the cell, and we are able to use that for energy in times of need. Glycogen, best way to think of this is stored sugar in the muscles and the liver. The thing about stored sugar in the muscles is in the form of glycogen is it has to be burned in the muscle cell itself. The liver can freely release the energy to the rest of the body when it may need. But that's why being active, whether it's actually going to the gym, it's doing something that you enjoy, it's walks, like regular walks, it's stand-up desks, it's all these things, it's burning through those glycogen stores. We're gonna talk about why that's important in a minute. Insulin resistance is an inability for the cell to hear the signal of insulin to put energy into the cell. Typically, it's because the cell's full, it's at max capacity of energy, and it can't hear the signal. So think about, you have music blaring into your ears and your eardrums become desensitized to the signal that you have to turn it up louder and louder over time. This is, years at hand. That's similar to insulin resistance. It's basically the cell can't hear that signal from insulin anymore, and it creates a lack of energy, but then a accumulation of energy in the form of fat. And then keto, it's a catchphrase for all things pertaining to ketosis, which ketosis, simply just a metabolic state of producing ketones in the bloodstream. And ketones are a superior fuel source, especially for the brain, that are byproducts of burning fat in the liver. And we're gonna talk about these a little bit more in depth, but this is just simply put. And the last few free radicals, also known as reactive oxygen species. they're a natural byproduct of metabolism. Again, we have to take oxygen and food calories, or food energy as in calories, to form ATP, which is what our body actually uses. In that process, it creates free radical damage. Glucose or sugar or carbohydrates produces more because they require more oxygen per molecule to create ATP, opposed to fat, which uses less oxygen to produce the same amount, if not more, molecules of ATP. So it's more efficient and creates less damage. So think of free radicals as little pinballs that leak out of the cell into other tissues in the body and damage the body. I'm not going to go into the science of what they are really doing, but that's just a good way to think of it. And autophagy and mitophagy they're similar things. Autophagy, think of it as cellular cleanup or recycling different elements of the cell waste, or in some cases dead or weak cells, to create stronger cells, to create better tissues, more energy production. Mitophagy is similar concept, but with the mitochondria. So again, the mitochondria live within the cell, but over time, they become weak, they produce, some garbage, and they're able to recycle that garbage or weak versions to become stronger mitochondria to produce better energy. So those are some terms, and again, I don't expect anyone to remember all these or what they mean, but just keep in mind as we go through, you're gonna hear them more and more. The next thing I wanna talk about is before we get into keto and brain health, is defining diet by the dictionary versus mainstream thinking. So the actual definition of diet is just what one person or community consumes. That's it. Now, mainstream thinking has made all these various diets and ways to follow these protocols, and a lot of thinking is, it's restrictive. It's counting calories, it's low calories, it's eating like a bird and nothing but just lettuce, and it's all these things that are unenjoyable and actually can harm the body. So I like to think of the ketogenic diet as actually a lifestyle. I think of any diet as a lifestyle. It's just really how you live your life, and not all diets are optimal. And in the context of brain health, ketogenic strategies and lifestyles are optimal for the brain. Now, before we move on, I want to end that section with my biggest belief on health or in life is health is internal. And I learned this the hard way, like I mentioned before. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor accidentally after hitting my head training with BMX that required an MRI that found it. And thankfully I hit my head, otherwise I'd be dead today. But it changed my perspective on what health is, because on the outside, I looked like a picture perfect example of health. I was being judged from the doctors and my peers as, in reference to my appearance. You're a professional athlete, you're young, I was 20 to 21 at this time, and you're in shape, you're healthy. And that's what we all think. And especially back in the 90s and then moving forward, more, it's like health was a reflection of what was on the outside. But that's not always the case, because in my case, I had a great outside, I had a great cover that represented health, but internally there was a lot going on that actually was damaging my health. And so that's something I like people to think about, because we can measure these things. Not only do we have MRIs and SPECT imaging to look at blood flow and activity and the anatomy of the brain, we have biomarkers. And that's another great thing about the ketogenic diet. It's the only diet with a biomarker. You can actually test your blood for a very efficient price at home or at a lab to see if you're doing it correctly. And then there's things like blood sugar levels and blood sugar damage, and things like CRP that measure inflammation, which is all seen inside, sometimes on the outside. But at the end of the day, health is internal. It's not always just what's on the outside. So a question I put in the outline was, what are some common issues that we or people we know may be experiencing as adults? And the things like lack of energy, midday crashes, I think we've all can experience that, or hunger, hormonal issues or mood swings, things like weight gain and fat accumulation, stress and inflammation, headaches, brain fog, lack of focus and cravings, all these types of things. And the next question I put in there was, what do we think the cause of these things are? And oftentimes mainstream thinking leads us to believe that it's a lack of exercise paired with overeating, or it's a lack of willpower, or it's just aging and genetics. And the actual cause is dysfunctional mitochondria, which produce our body's energy, and an inability to burn fat. And when it comes to genetics, I'm not gonna get into it too much, but it's something I've been learning more about. It's really profound, is we can influence 75% of the 140,000 genes that we have by lifestyle choice, and they can show that now. And about, I think, 95% of what onset, adult diseases are stress-induced, which is an epigenetic, which is the expression of genes. It's an epigenetic factor. So 95% of what we experience in the modern Western world today as adults is influenced by our choices, whether we know it or not. And I think that's really profound to think about. And that goes back to health being internal, because you may be upregulating or downregulating specific genes based on stress, more importantly. But that could be physiological stress, emotional stress, or stress from toxins that we're consuming that we may not even know or that we're living with. We'll talk more about that too. So the first question is, how do mitochondria become dysfunctional? And we just talked about stress and toxins as one of those things, but chronically elevated levels of blood sugar or glucose levels. And so just because you're in shape or you're skinny or you're not overweight or obese doesn't mean you don't have chronic high levels of blood sugar, which are doing a lot of damage that can be measured in the blood over time that create a lot of different negative outcomes. And poor sleep and recovery, that's a huge piece, because all these things go back to stress. And stress, whether it's a thought or it's a physical experience, creates the same chemicals that create the same damage. And when we get into this, type A, go, go, go mindset, that does lead to success, it doesn't always serve us for so long. And it's only a matter of understanding these things and creating this consciousness level to it and optimizing it that we can reduce stress, even if it's not showing physically. And I think it's really easy for people that run their own business or that are, in these businesses that have these business goals, or athletes or whatever it may be, that, are really determined to succeed, to deprive sleep and food as, less of a priority to become successful when it's the other way around. Also, glucose metabolism, so burning carbs and sugar for fuel predominantly, not being able to produce fat or burn fat for fuel, creates more of those free radicals that I explained earlier. So it creates more damage in the body. So you can think of that as like a campfire, a lot of smoke. Think of smoke as free radicals and inflammation. And if you ever breathe in a campfire smoke or any kind of smoke, it's not good and it's not enjoyable. Let's see, we talked about free radical production. And the more free radical production that we have and the more inflammation as a byproduct of that, the mitochondria become damaged even further. And what happens when the mitochondria become damaged is, no matter how much glucose is in the system from the food we eat, when they're dysfunctional and damaged, they can't utilize that glucose fully or even effectively at all. And that creates more damage, and it creates this cycle of dysfunctional mitochondria and lower energy production, which creates more of this free radical damage and inefficiency to produce energy. And it's just this long-going cycle that eventually leads to more severe problems down the road, fat accumulation, not feeling optimal, not thinking optimal. And that's what we're talking about, is brain health. And far too often do people prioritize their physical appearance, like I talked about earlier, health being internal. It's just a matter of what's going up here, and we can't see our brain. And that's something I've learned is why I think a lot of people don't prioritize their brain, because you can't see it, and the brain can't feel things. It perceives things based on signals. But if we only knew what we were doing to our brain, which we can show and test, we would think differently about it. So that's my role in this conversation, is to show that. Another thing about chronically elevated blood glucose levels is it leads to rapid cell division and increased aging rates, which now they can measure a part of your DNA called the telomeres to see your actual biological age. So you may be 30 years old, but you may have genetics or DNA like a 50-year-old based on lifestyle choices. The cool thing about knowing that is they also know that you can reverse that. You can anti-age to a degree. And it's really amazing to be able to see that stuff. But also, chronically elevated levels of glucose leads to more stress and more inflammation, which creates more damage to the mitochondria, which creates less energy production, and insulin resistance, which is, again, that desensitized ability to hear the signal from insulin. And this can actually occur in the brain. And when that occurs in the brain, you can imagine how energy production is lowered in the brain, which why we can see, brain fog, headaches, lack of focus, and all that stuff. But then it also leads to more fat accumulation in the body, which it's all these cycles and these holistic mechanisms. And so that all leads to the second question of that two-part question, is why we can't burn fat. And simply put, when we eat a carbohydrate, whether it's a potato, it's a can of soda, it's a Twizzler, it's an apple, it's organic broccoli, it turns to sugar in the body. And when that happens, the pancreas turns on to release insulin. Again, insulin's main objective is to get energy from the bloodstream to the cell. And then when that's happening, fat burning is shut off because there's energy present. There's no reason to burn fat for fuel. The problem with that comes, especially as we age and our metabolism slows down, which is a whole nother thing we can talk about later, is excessive carbohydrate intake opposed to the energy that we actually demand and are utilizing leads to excessive glucose levels, which leads to the cells being full and having high levels of insulin, which leaves us with excessive glucose filling over into the cells. And now I mentioned earlier, excessive glucose that's not being utilized in the cell leads to glycogen storage in the muscles and the liver. And I'm sure some of you have heard of this, but non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a real issue these days. And that's where there's so much overspill of energy in the bloodstream that it's getting deposited in the liver. And that becomes really damaging, as well as there's a thing called skinny fat. So on the outside, you're in shape or you're skinny, but around your organs, there's this visceral fat building up that's like kind of suffocating your organs. And as you can imagine, all these things lead to inefficient energy production and blood flow to the brain especially, and that's where these issues as we get older occur. And the other thing to mention about that, and I'm not trying to rant too much, but it's 30 to 40 years before symptoms of Alzheimer's develops is when it starts to actually, 30 to 40 years before symptoms show is when Alzheimer's actually starts developing in the body. And that's due to SPECT imaging and different biomarkers, so they can show that now. And that's where a part of my passion comes in from traumatic brain injuries and mental health, things like that, that leads the brain to become dysfunctional. And they're now showing scans of 30-year-old athletes having brains that look like 6-year-old Alzheimer's patients because of that deficiency in energy and blood flow that lead the mitochondria becoming damaged. And that over time can actually turn into them dying and building up plaques in the brain. But you don't need to have a TBI to create certain damage in the brain. And so that's why a lot of this is super important, especially for people that want to optimize their performance in all areas of life. And so the topic of this conversation is, so what is the solution? The solution is to use keto as a tool or a lifestyle that you follow, which we can talk about that later on, to burn fat for fuel and to reduce our sugar intake. And the benefits of burning fat is you're producing, more importantly, the ketones that we talked about that are a superior fuel source. And I mentioned one reason is because they're able to bypass dysfunctional, actually I didn't mention this, but they're able to create less free radical production by using less oxygen, but also they can bypass part of the dysfunctional mitochondria to produce energy when glucose, even abundant in the bloodstream, can't. So they actually can help repair the mitochondria, increase energy production. And this is why when people start going on a ketogenic diet for a few weeks, maybe they're not seeing the physical transformation that everyone talks about in mainstream media because it doesn't really work that way. But they start to see their brain turn on. They have clearer thinking. They have more focus. They have more energy without the mood swings, the hanger, or the crashes. And it's because of those ketones being able to bypass the dysfunctional mitochondria. And we talked about the campfire analogy. The cool thing about ketones is you can look at them as solar energy. More efficient, put off less waste, and to a degree, your body can start to recycle a lot of these elements and substrates that produce energy. The other cool thing about keto is once you adopt this lifestyle, you have the right tools set in place and the right plans, you become really efficient at burning fat, dietary and body fat for fuel, which leads to body composition being improved. There's a reduction in inflammation from two things, the metabolism aspect, but also the weight. I've had clients that dropped 20, 25 pounds over the course of working together, and their knee pain that they always had went away from an old injury. And it's because there's so much inflammation built up from the weight and the pressure, as well as internally from the diet and the metabolism, that it just cleared up because they optimized these things. And then you got improved sleep, recovery, digestion, physical performance. You start feeling better overall, so you start performing better. Liberation from cravings and empowered choices. Those are some of my favorites. Being someone that used to eat 6 to 8 meals a day and would get hangry in the afternoon if I didn't finish my 2-liter Dr. Pepper or have my Swiss cake rolls or Star Crunches and candy and all these things. Being able to not finish a meal for the first time in my 31 years is really phenomenal. But then also to be able to go all day without thinking about food or without needing food for energy, because I'm a fat burning machine now. I can burn fat in my body or in my diet and not need to worry about my next meal. And so being able to fast is really cool. And it's not, we're gonna talk about fasting in a minute, but it's not what mainstream thinking makes it out to be. It's just, you're able to be more empowered in your choices moving forward, especially with food, but that allows you to show up better in life in all areas of life. So it's really one of my favorite pieces to be on the conscious piece. And that gives us more time to live. from my 6 to 8 meals a day going down to 1 to 3, maybe 3 meals is where I'm at now. Majority of the time it's 2. It's a fat coffee in the morning or just a black coffee or tea, and then 2 meals. But you have more time. You're cooking less, you're cleaning less, and that gives us more time for our friends, our family, our business, our goals, our side hustles, our side passions, whatever it may be. I think that's another huge, profound benefit of this lifestyle. And there's therapeutic benefits. I'm not a doctor, so I can't make claims, but I have friends and clients that have been able to get off certain, diabetes medications. I have a friend who we worked together, guide him along his journey to get rid of drug-resistant seizures. He was having up to 7 a day. And now he just went like 6 months without having a single one. And that was after they wanted to cut his brain open, or skull open, to take out more brain for a 3rd time. And he was on 12 meds. He's on like 2 or 3 now. So it's pretty phenomenal. There's a lot of things like cancer and PCOS, thyroid hormone issues, and there's so many more. So I think that's another amazing thing to think about. Is it's not just about the weight. I don't have a weight loss journey that led me here. It's more about what's happening internally, especially in the brain. Because once you get this right, whether it's psychological or physiological, the rest or emotional, the rest of the things are a byproduct of prioritizing what's up here. And so I know that was a lot. And I apologize if I spoke kind of quick. I love this stuff and I get really stoked on it. But the next section in the PDF is I want to leave you guys with 5 steps to burn fat and fuel your brain. 5 simple steps. And on the PDF, I hyperlinked the title to a video I created that breaks these things down in more depth if you want to learn more about the why and the how. And then we're putting out more videos for each one of those 5 steps to give even more feedback and more context of how to do these things. But the first step is to reset the metabolism. And the goal there is to lower glucose and insulin levels. So it's real simple. Just eat real food. You don't have to follow keto at the beginning. That's not what I do with my clients, and that's not what I do or I recommend. Like some people, yeah, if they really want to, or if they've been eating whole food for a while, paleo, whatever, and they're down to go that route, cool. But if you're starting anywhere from where I started from, then just the goal is real food and to cut out the sugar, cut out the alcohol, and cut out the grains. And that may be scary to a lot of people, and there's ways to work around that. But at the end of the day, to reset the metabolism and burn fat for fuel, which if you give that 2 or 3 days, especially when you go keto 2 or 3 days, it's easy. It's crazy the switch that happens. And the second step is managing stress and exercise. And I lump them together because a lot of people think they gotta work harder, eat less, and that leads to a lot of chronic training patterns that creates more stress. And so the goal or the aim of reducing or managing stress and exercise is to reduce cortisol, free radical production, and glycogen. So with the stress piece, we're reducing cortisol, which I don't know if you guys knew this, I just learned this recently, that when you get stressed out and your body produces adrenaline and cortisol, your IQ is halved within like 7 minutes. So trying to understand why we make the choices we make when we're in stress, especially around food, it's really easy to see how we can't always be in control. And when you're trying to make business decisions or relationship decisions or things like that, and you're stressed, you're probably not making the best decision. I can speak from personal experience, reflecting on that, how that shows up. And then, working on certain habits. When you're stressed and you become conscious to when you're stressed and you go to make a decision, learning how your personality and your habits that are created from your personality, it's easy to see why change is difficult. But once you create that consciousness, that awareness to your personality, it makes it much more manageable to set many goals to create these small changes that lead to long-term effects. So the other part of that is exercise. We mentioned in order to burn fat, we have to reduce glucose and insulin, and then we have to start burning through our glycogen stores in the muscle and the livers, or the muscles and the liver, so that way the liver can burn fat. If your glycogen stores are full, you have chronic high levels of glucose and insulin, the body sees no reason to burn fat, and any excess gets stored as fat for later on. And that's a survival technique from before we had technology in grocery stores. It started out as a survival technique, but now that we have an abundance of food from all around the world at all times of the hour, you can buy food, you can buy groceries off your phone and have them delivered to your house. Like, we have an abundance of food, and because of that, we're seeing dramatic obesity rates just skyrocketing more and more. And so the goal of managing stress and exercising is this, I don't like the word balance because it's not measurable, but it's to create this, homeostatic, theme with stress and exercise to do different things, but to complement one another. And then the third step is go keto for 6+ weeks. Some people need longer, some people can do it for 6 weeks or so, but the goal of that is initiate fat burning either initially or even further. And once you can do that, the power that comes from that is amazing. And once you adapt, which we'll talk about that later on, once you adapt long-term down the road of this lifestyle, you'll be able to go off the plan here and there. Like or not the plan, you're like, it's a lifestyle. You'll be able to, eat real food, high fat, low carb, no sugar, but then you'll be able to have cake at a wedding, or you'll be able to have a beer or something like that, or indulge purposely. But by that time, you'll have set up all these tools, these systems in place to allow you to plug into one of them and then to be able to do something of an indulgence and not go against you and not harm you as well. The fourth step is time-restricted eating, also known as fasting. But people get scared of fasting because there's just there's a large amount of mis and disinformation around fasting. And the definition of fasting is just to refrain from food for some time. But there's all kinds of fasts. You can do a 24-hour fast. You can do a water fast. You can do, a 7-day fast. You can do 1 meal a day. You can do 16 hours fast, 8 hours, or eat 8 hours. So it's time-restricted eating is the word that we like to use because it's more welcoming. And people are like, oh, what is that? Like, oh, you just basically set a window of when you want to eat, when you don't. That's fasting. It can be 24 hours. It can be 12 hours. But the more time you give your body to digest and recover and not taxing it with digesting food, the more opportunity you have for it to initiate fat burning and to recover. If it's always turned on, especially if it's always in stress survival mode, you can't imagine it's going to want to repair or to grow. So time restricted eating, we use that to look at autophagy, mitophagy, and it just helps to ramp up fat burning and just gives the body a break for some time. And the fifth step is exogenous ketones, but this is primarily focused at brain fuel, especially when we're adapting to these things. This can be a tool to leverage all these steps before. And it kind of like helps people, dip their toes in. Like I recommend if you're not ready for keto right away, just eat real food, drink water, avoid alcohol and toxins, and have exogenous ketones. And you'll start to see some of these shifts, especially up here, take place. And it's gonna wanna make you optimize that further. What else can I do to get more of this feeling? So to end this, the ultimate goal is something called metabolic flexibility and keto adaptation. And simply put, metabolic flexibility, it gives you the freedom to enjoy your life and the foods that you want to eat at certain times. And that takes time to get there. Discipline equals freedom. I know Isaac's a big proponent of talking about that, but if you give yourself some time to be disciplined, it opens up this world of freedom to play and to enjoy different things, especially if you're traveling around the world and you want to experience different cuisine. Like, it allows you to do that. And a basic definition of metabolic flexibility is understanding how to use glucose and ketones or fat for fuel at certain times when they enter the body. But you have to turn the lever from sugar burning to fat burning and then get it kind of, back and forth. So it takes some time, but metabolic flexibility is just basically being able to burn a variety of substrates for energy and to be able to go, and do your thing once in a while and not, go all against you. And then keto adaptation is basically a process, a tug of war between the brain and the muscles. The brain can only burn glucose or ketones. The muscle can burn glucose, ketones, and fatty acids. And so once it understands how this can, they can leverage the two of them, and the muscles kind of give up ketones to the brain primarily, that's what we're talking about. But also there's this period of adaptation where, not to get too into the weeds, but there's these like tunnels from the bloodstream to the cells. Over time of following this lifestyle and adapting, those tunnels multiply and they magnify to allow more ketones to go through the bloodstream to the cells. And that's really what's happening. And that takes time. There's adaptations that occur 4 weeks in, 12 weeks in, and months in, and up to a year. And so it's a little bit about keto adaptation. It's basically just the brain being able to utilize ketones predominantly and allowing the muscles to use other substrates. And so at the end of the day, your brain health is your health, but in all areas of it's your wealth in all areas of your life, not just your business, not just your health, but your career, your personal life, your family, your education, your sport, spirituality. When you optimize your brain, the other areas of your life become more abundant. And I've seen this take place in my life in so many areas. And the more I focus on optimizing my brain, the more I see things being easier and more efficient. And these coincidences happen, but it's not really a coincidence. It's you're optimizing that, and that's you're being clear. You're able to think more clear and make better choices. And when our brain feels good, we feel good, we think good, and we look good. And it's just that's what we all want. We want to think good, feel good, and look good, and we want to perform good, perform well. And the more focus we have, the more mental clarity, cognitive improvement, all these things, it equals more productivity. So if you think about your goals, whether it's business or personal, the more optimal you're performing, the more productive you are in those areas and the more efficient you are. And it gives you more time, it gives you more freedom. And I think at the end of the day, we're all going for time. That's why we do what we do. We help our clients find these or create these systems to optimize their efforts to create more time in their life, to enjoy life, and to be more efficient at reaching their goals. And again, like the less brain fog we have, headaches, stress, and all these things, it creates more productivity, more enjoyment, and the less risk of disease that we are setting ourselves up for. And actually, the better your brain feels, your body feels better, and you are going to want to do more, and you're going to want to show up. You're going to get out of bed feeling motivated, not dragging yourself out of bed and having to motivate yourself. You're going to have a better purpose in that, because that's another thing. Like, my main thing about this is that level of consciousness. It's when people say, "Hey, Josh, I want to lose 20 pounds," first language is like, no, you don't want to lose it. You want to remove it. But why? And once we dig deep, it's because they want to feel better, maybe physically and mentally. Maybe they have things they want to do that they can't, but having that purpose really sets you up. And I know Isaac is huge on this. This is why we connected originally, but having a clear why or purpose for anything we do in life, it allows us to keep that motivation going, because motivation is just energy in the moment. It fizzles out. But if you have a purpose, it keeps you going. And again, those 5 steps, I want you guys to keep them simple. Like, think about it simply. Like, simplicity is key here. It's like, don't get too complex. Don't get caught in the weeds. Like, I love the science. That's just something I never thought I'd say, but I love learning about it because I love learning why. But you don't have to do that. Just eat real food. And if you want to learn more, you can always learn more. You can always work with someone to learn more of these things and implement more complex strategies. But at the end of the day, eating real food, cutting out sugar and alcohol for some time, and drinking water and other things that we can talk about if you guys have more questions about that, is just key. And it allows you to focus on, I think one of the things too is to focus on aligning your choices with your desires. And I got this from Isaac the other year, but if you have a desire, a goal, and maybe you're not reaching it the way you want, or you're suffering to get there, it's like, well, audit your choices. Maybe you're making too many choices, or maybe you're not making enough of the right ones. And are they aligned with what you're saying you want? And so this keto to me is a tool. It's a lifestyle, but it's a tool. And it creates this level of consciousness in your physical health and your mental health in all areas of your life. So that's what I want to end it on, is at the end of the day, just be the change you want to see. Don't wait for these changes to make you feel a certain way. And that's something I'm practicing more and learning more, but is be that change and really audit your choices. And are they truly aligned with your desires and your goals, or are they taking time and energy away from you getting there? So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate Isaac and Mary allowing me to share something I'm super passionate about. And if you guys have any other questions, whatever time we have left, I would love to answer them. And I guess Isaac and Mary can give me a cap of how long we can speak for, because I love talking about this stuff. So again, appreciate it.
Gosh, that was incredible. Thank you so much for the training. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions to Josh. I know that was a lot of material, but I don't think I've ever heard of all this good information before. That's actually made me want to consider keto before. So that was great. But we'll go ahead and open it up for a few minutes for you guys to ask some questions to Josh.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Hey, this is Eric. So I have a question. So, ketogenic diet's actually been around for a long time. Atkins diet back in the late 80s, early 90s starts off with 2 weeks of what you call BDK, or beneficial dietary ketosis, but then moves out of a strictly ketogenic state pretty quickly because of at the time, I guess, kind of fears of doing that long term because of other deficiencies and things like that. So what's the up-to-date thinking in terms of things like other nutrients, fiber, things like that you get from a more like a Whole 30 or kind of whole foods type of a diet that incorporates other vegetables and things like that? Kind of what do you need to make sure that you keep eating in conjunction with a really high percentage of fat as a macronutrient, without getting all the carbs? And then what might you need to supplement? Because I guess that's kind of the new thing, is people are now doing keto sort of as a ongoing, sort of a permanent arrangement. Mm-hmm. What are you missing out on, and how do you compensate for that?
So that was a loaded question. First, The last question about nutrients is supplements, of course, like quality supplements, but then organ meats. And that is, so a lot of people are doing carnivore. I don't know if I fully buy into that for many reasons. You mentioned fiber and the gut flora. Now talking about that is, so there's a couple things. When you're implementing a ketogenic diet as a tool or lifestyle, it depends on the context of what your goal is. And so I've been following it for long enough that I become adapted to fat and ketones for fuel. And so my carb range doesn't have to be as low as maybe someone just starting. And that's because the adaptation process, but also the glycogen levels and things like that. So over time, the metabolic flexibility comes in, because what's happening if someone's overweight and they're feeling bad, or they're feeling bad without being overweight, or vice versa, the mitochondria are damaged. And that's at the forefront, as well as inflammation of a lot of different diseases, whether they're, severe like cancer, or they're, diabetes and insulin resistance, things like that. So once you correct that and allow the mitochondria to heal over time, they're able to produce energy efficiently from glucose, carbohydrates. So sweet potato, I obviously recommend whole foods. We call them smart carbs. But you're out slamming pizza and cake and candy, that's gonna be very toxic and damaging. But once you take the time to adapt and you reach your goal with body composition or mental clarity or whatever it is for you, you can start testing your blood for glucose levels and see how you respond. And if you're responding well, which there's parameters around that, you don't need to be so strict on low carb. So for some people, they say 5% carbs is a ketogenic diet. You get 75% fat, 20% protein, 5% carbs. That's a great baseline to figure out how things are going week after week. But as you do that long enough and you optimize and you figure out what's going on for your body, your individuality, and you reach your goals, then you can start playing around with testing things like 50 grams of net carbs from whole food sources and test your blood sugar 2 hours later. And if it's under 120, typically 90 to 110, you're in good shape. And if it's not, try the test again the next day with 25 grams and see how you respond. It really depends on these biomarkers and how your body responds. Now, in the sense of fiber, I'm a big fan of non-starchy vegetables. I also love sweet potato. I follow a ketogenic lifestyle more times than not. Well, that's a lifestyle. So like more times than not, I'm in a state of ketosis. But when you think about fiber and what it turns into a thing called butyrate. And ketones, the superior of the three that shows up in your blood, is beta hydroxybutyrate. And so there's a lot of research going on right now with looking at ketones as a way to fuel the gut flora and to manage that balance. There's a ton that I don't think they're ever going to be able to research all of the gut microbiome. There's just so much that goes on. But that's one thing that's happening. But I think the main takeaway for your overall question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is if you initiate a state of ketosis as a lifestyle long enough to reach your goals, and then start testing your blood to see how damaged or optimal your mitochondria are functioning now, you can play with a paleo style eating. I still don't believe that it's healthy to maintain a regular consumption of things like bananas and pineapples, especially out of season from all around the world. But it comes back to how your mitochondria are responding, and if your blood sugar is skyrocketing and staying high, and if you're storing fat. If your blood sugar is high chronically and you're storing fat, it's a good indicator that you're what we call carbohydrate intolerant. And so what I do today is, I talk about that thing, metabolic flexibility. I've done enough groundwork for long enough that I, reversed, or not reversed, but maybe supported my mitochondria enough to where I have a sense of flexibility to, if I eat even a piece of pizza, which isn't optimal, or cake or whatever, or sweet potato, or, overindulge in macadamia nuts, which is easy for me to do, it doesn't go against me, and I have protocols like fasting set in place and workouts, things like that. So at the end of the day, my goal is to get someone to implement keto long enough to reach their goals personally, and then they can start having an abundance of vegetables as long as they stay away from the sugars and the alcohol and the stress chronically. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. So, and then Atkins. That is what started a lot of this. And actually, Dr. Eric Westman here at Duke University, he took Dr. Atkins' work in the late 80s, early 90s, and put it into clinical practice at Duke, which is where his practice is now. And he's worked with thousands of patients. using a ketogenic approach. Now, the difference between Atkins and keto is, like you said, it was like a 2-week protocol or something like that, and then it's like high fat, or high protein, sorry. Ketogenic diet is high fat, and it's, people say moderate protein, but it's really optimized for your individuality and your goals. And then it's ultra low carb, and that's for some time. Atkins was on the right track, but it was high protein, high fat, and the quality wasn't, there was no, adherence or recommendation for quality. So a lot of people do this. They recommend, go to McDonald's and get a burger with a bun. Amazing place to start metabolically, because if you can keep your blood sugar controlled and low, that's gonna have a bigger effect on your health than organic long term. But the goal is to eat real food that isn't chemically filled. So again, sorry for the rant, but that was a loaded question. So in conclusion, you can follow a ketogenic diet for some time and years and get to the point where you're flexible enough to have, starches and fruits and things like that. It's all individualized based on testing how you respond and the damage to your mitochondria, or maybe not. So it just depends on things, context.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Anyone else who'd like to ask a question or takeaway?
I saw some comments in the chat.
Hey there.
Hey, what's up?
All right. So I got lots of people around, so I don't want to be too loud or ask a long question. But I think that one question that would be really good to answer is what's the first step? People will go, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Haven't really thought about it before or wanted to do it, but now that you kind of explained what it is, it's not just like a quick crash diet, drop some weight or something. It's actually how to live a more optimized, healthier life. What's the best way to get started?
I want to answer that, but you mentioned something that's also a great point. People think like, oh, I got to eat less and I'm going to lose weight. When you do that long enough, your body's smart and your RMR, your resting metabolic rate, will drop to counter that and to save or create a survival sense. So people will go on these crazy 500 calories a day diets for some time, and they don't understand that their RMR is going down lower and lower to make up for that deficit. And then when they try to eat a normal amount of food, they start putting on weight and they're like, oh, that diet didn't work. And it's because they're damaging their metabolism. So to your question, the first step, like I said, is keep it simple, is to focus on your glucose and insulin levels, meaning the foods that create spikes and high levels of glucose and insulin, you want to avoid them for some time. And so that doesn't mean forever, but it's even, all these fruit smoothies and juices and all these organic things. It doesn't matter if it's organic. Doesn't matter if Buddhists prayed over this flower garden that bees harvested for honey. It's molecularly the same thing in your body. It's going to create the same damage and it's going to store as fat if in the wrong context. So the main first objective for anyone approaching cleaning up their diet to get to a ketogenic diet or whatever, they want to lose weight, whatever it may be, or fuel their brain more efficiently, is just eat real food and avoid the sugars, avoid the starches, avoid the grains, avoid chronic stress, exercise or mentally, and avoid alcohol. So things like just meat, fish, eggs, beef, nuts, seeds, non-starchy vegetables, things like cauliflower, broccoli, asparagus, cucumber, leafy greens, Brussels sprouts. Those are some of my favorites. And then raise the fats up, and a lot of people are like, oh, this is so much saturated fat, all this. Your brain needs saturated fat, and it's very clear in the literature now that it's not even worth arguing over anymore. It doesn't need saturated fat with sugar. That's the problem. Sugar with anything is the problem. It's not fat, it's not protein. It's quality of protein and sugar. So things like olives, olive oil, avocado oil. We got a video on this actually. 4 steps to reset your metabolism. That just went live this week. Brian just reminded me of that. So we're doing more videos to break down each one of those 5 steps to burn fat and fuel your brain. This recent one was 4 steps to reset your metabolism. But yeah, raising the fats, like I said, like coconut oil, MCT oil. If you're gonna do dairy, I recommend doing organic at the least, just because there's a lot of gross things in conventional dairy. But yeah, just lower sugar, grains, starches, whatever creates sugar in the body. Like Dr. Westman says, anything that you put in your mouth, once it passes this point, turns to sugar if it's a carbohydrate. Doesn't matter if it's most organic carbohydrate in the world. It turns to sugar. And if you're not feeling optimally in the brain and you're storing fat in your body, you probably don't need to be eating sugar or starch for some time. So yeah, I would check out that video, 4 steps to reset your metabolism, on my YouTube and Facebook, I believe. Josh Perry BMX. But yeah, keep it simple. Real food, keep the starches gone, the sugars gone, the alcohol, the grains, raise the fats, and yeah, try to de-stress as much as you can. Thanks for reminding me about that.
Awesome. And Josh, if any of our coaches or clients wanted to work with you personally, can you let us know what kind of programs you have, or just what you offer?
Yeah, so I offer one-on-one coaching, but then also my partner and I are putting together a group coaching program. So we're going to do trainings and coaching, and it comes with the plans and the PDFs and all the supplemental things. But some people they want the one-on-one time. They want to ask intimate questions. Or they just want that accountability and support. And then other people want that accountability and support in a group setting to be able to bounce ideas off each other, have accountability partners, and it's just a way for me to reach more people. So yeah, group coaching and the one-on-one coaching.
No, this is great. I appreciate it. I've loved working with Josh, and we want to have him in our group more, kind of participating. But if there's any other questions, feel free to email Mary. She can send them to Josh, or email Josh directly. And if you can leave your direct contact information to Josh, that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, sweet. Well, I appreciate you guys allowing me to share. And yeah, if you guys got any questions, just let me know. I can give Mary, Mary, you have my email, but I can type it in. It's just josh@joshperrybmx.com. But yeah, I love this stuff. So I love helping people realize the power of their brain once they can turn it on like I was able to do. And that's another thing I want to say too, is I love asking people, how do you feel? 9 times out of 10, people respond fine. I used to do that because I didn't know how it felt to feel optimal. And once I did, and I raised my baseline, it's hard to go back to doing things the old way because you don't enjoy them because of how you feel. And so one of my favorite things to do is to get to people to feel great and to change their language. Like, I want people to say in response to how do you feel, I want them to feel, oh, I feel great. And then I feel fine. But I feel like it's just this new thing in society today to feel fine, to feel mediocre. But yet we want to aspire to do all these amazing things that requires more energy of us. So yeah, that was my last little thing I wanted to share.
All right, thank you guys so much. Thank you again to Josh. I'll send out this recording, and I hope you guys all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Appreciate you.
Hey, Josh. See you, buddy.
Later.